Horizon, an American Saga, Chapter 1. That's right, folks, Chapter 1. Guess what? It's kind of exciting. Kevin Costner, the Cos Man himself, the wonderful Wizard of Cos, he's back doing movies. He did it. He's making a movie again. It's been how long? It's been a while since Kevin Costner was given the opportunity to star, write, and direct his own feature. But now we're doing it. Kevin Costner did a lot of stuff on television recently. He was on like 4 seasons of Yellowstone. And now he's like, I'm using my cachet over here, being a part of the Taylor Sheridan Brain Trust. I'm going to go back to what I love, and that is America. That is being a cool guy for old people, and that's making movies. So he's doing it. Kevin Costner is producing his own film. He's putting a lot of his own money into this. It is from New Line, but a lot of the money is coming from Kevin Costner to make at least 2 films in his American Saga story. The first one came out in June. The second one is scheduled to come out in August. We know he wants to make more of them. We'll see how that goes. By the looks of things, I think he's going to get the chance to make another couple. But it's time, folks. Kevin Costner is back making movies. And that's very exciting to me. What's really cool about this thing, and I have a lot to talk about with this movie. I sound very positive at the start of this. As we go on, you're going to realize I did not like this movie. But I really love what this represents. I think it's so cool and important that Kevin Costner got to do this. He financed it himself. He used his own money, his own millions. He cast the people he wanted to cast. He made the film he wanted to make, regardless of the end product. He got to do that. Something that is so rare to see happen in today's movie climate, you know? You don't see it anymore. We are kind of in this weird era where the independent filmmakers can't really make their next second independent film. They're attached to the big blockbusters. Like just this weekend, the director of Pig makes a new movie in the Quiet Place universe. You know, Lee Isaac Chung's got a Twisters movie coming out. So it's such like a nebulous place where auteurs are kind of either forced to just do this blockbuster thing over here and never really make the passion project on a grand scale. The only thing that comes close to this that's coming out this year is Francis Ford Coppola's Megalopolis, where it's another huge budgeted film from a guy financing it himself. It sucks that this is still the case, that these legendary filmmakers have to finance things themselves to make their movie. But at the same time, you get a certain level of creative control to do that. It would just be nice if guys like Francis Ford Coppola and Kevin Costner didn't have to put their own money on the line to make a movie, because those are 2 filmmakers people like. But nonetheless, Kevin Costner has been playing the game for a long time. He knew exactly what he was doing to make this movie. He knew exactly what he wanted to do. And what it is, it's really just an okay film. And that's fine. The worst thing you could say about this film is that it's not a whole story. And that's a problem. It's a huge problem, just kind of like with tentpole films. Is this movie like a real movie or a sequel to the next movie, or just leading you on to the next movie? This is a whole idea that is not fully realized in this piece, and that really sucks. Like, there is very little narrative structure or very little flow to everything. We introduce a lot of characters. We set up a lot of things to come later and barely spend time with anybody truly. It is a mess, but it's the kind of mess that I appreciate the attempt being made here. Is this perfect? By no means. But there is something very specific in its beauty that you can cling to and hold on to and just be like, yeah, this feels like exactly what Costner wanted to make. And whether or not you like that is solely dependent on the person. Now, this is a conversation I was having with some people after I saw this. Now, I saw this movie with my father. And my father is of that generation that grew up with the early Costner stuff and also was like on the late cusp of like the Westerns fading out. You know, I think there's an era of man, and I'm going to say this in particular because even Kevin Costner said it himself, like he makes movies specifically for men, but sometimes he wants to like add more of a feminine feel to it. It's just hard for him to do, and I get that. He's almost 60, or he is 60. It's not going to be perfect. But there's a specific type of man, a specific age of man, who grew up with like John Ford, John Wayne. There is the fantasy about being like the cool cowboy outlaw living in the Old West and having that life be something you want, and just being like comfortable and seductive by just being stiff and stoic. And that's fine. I am not complaining about that. I get it. I think for my generation, that is kind of shifted into being like, sadly, like a Billy Butcher or a Spider-Man, where it's like, you know, you got like this power and you're kind of like fucked up or something. The thing that older men liked was wanting to be the cowboy. For my generation, it's being the superhero. But because of that, I have a very strong disconnect to a lot of stuff. Now, I have nothing against Westerns. I genuinely like Westerns. It's a fun genre. But when it comes to like wanting to exist in that time period, and this is the thing I was talking with my father about, he's the kind of guy that's like, I could live in the Old West. I think it'd be fun. I have no aspiration whatsoever to dress like that, be in that time period. Nothing about that aesthetic or that world seems fun or interesting or a place I want to visit. I wouldn't even go to Westworld. If Delos was real, I'd be like, I have no desire to be here. I don't want to fire a gun. I don't want to do this. For me, that aesthetic that I'd want to go to is like a 40s noir film where you're like a gumshoe detective like on the mean streets and you like lost your love and you're like a miserable bitter guy post-war or something. That's more appealing to me. Western, where you wear a cowboy hat and you ride a horse, fuck that noise. Not something that appeals to me. I think it appeals to an older generation or a specific type of man today. It's why Yellowstone was so successful. The thing with Yellowstone, though, is Kevin Costner is not a Taylor Sheridan type of creative where he wants to expand this world in a specific way. Costner wants to make something look good, and he's a movie guy. And you can really feel that he's a movie guy because this is a movie that looks so much like a fucking movie. And I have no problem with that whatsoever. Make your movie that looks like a movie, man. You are obviously filming in real locations. You have lots of extras. You have one big set piece and you're like, we're going to do the big stunts here. There's one moment about early on in the film where it's like, we just built a town, let's burn it down and we'll have fun that way. And I'm like, for that, this is a movie. Like, you're making a movie, you're doing something fun here. I appreciate that. You know how to film this aesthetic. You know how to make the colors of the land look so vibrant and powerful. You are doing something so specific there, and it's really exciting to see. It is beautifully shot. The cinematography is gorgeous. It's just the editing and the pacing and the writing and the flow that just destroy this whole thing. Where maybe if you are somebody comfortable or you just love seeing this stuff, because in the cinema I saw this in, it's definitely an older demographic that doesn't go to every movie. They want to see the Cost Man, you know, and I get that. He's a cool guy. So maybe they'll be okay with that stuff. But if you're like me and you go to movies all the time and you talk about movies all the time, the cracks start to show. When we're 2 hours in and you suddenly introduce me to new characters, you're like losing a lot of the momentum. When you are just picking the points you want to specifically say for specific things, you really are losing the momentum. There's some really good editing choices in this movie that's very strong and powerful. There are some very, very poor editing choices where you can't get a sense of depth of field, where anyone's standing in a room. We cut from shot to shot to shot to shot to shot so frequently. And I will say, a lot of this does play out like the classic machismo male fantasy, which it always strikes a nerve with me when a movie has a couple. There's two things that happen in this movie. And again, this is just from, I'm a young guy. This is a perspective from a young guy who is very much aware of the Hollywood system and knows the types of films that Costner wants to make. When he first shows up, when Costner's character first shows up in this movie, there is like this kind of like charlatan in the town that he's stopping by who's trying to like get her kicks with a guy, and she is 30 years younger than him. And she's like, this is the hottest guy in the world. And he has to play it off like, I don't need to, save this girl or anything, but she's only attracted to him. the one of like 5 female characters in this movie, none of them perfectly written. I understand what we're doing here. Costner can't write a woman that isn't in love with a man, whatever. Or if he does, it's just a mess. But this young woman played by Abby Lee, she is infatuated with him, and he has to shove it off like he's not, but then suddenly he is thrust into a situation where he has to become like the caretaker and like take care of her and a baby, and he's like, I'll do it. You know, it's such like a male fantasy thing where like a young woman is really going to like crawl on top of you and have sex with you while you sit there and do nothing, and you get to be like a protective father who like kills asshole like youths. It's so annoying. And then there's like another sequence with like the Luke Wilson character who I relatively enjoyed, where he's like telling like a nerdy guy who wears glasses like, stop drawing and go help the other men. I'm like, I get it. You're saying something about like back in the day you had to be like a real man to survive in the West, and just shoving that in there, it's very annoying. I never feel good about like a sequence where a director who is older has a sequence where he has to have sex with a younger female co-star. It's something that happened. The one that comes to my mind is like in The Mule, that Clint Eastwood movie where he like gives himself a threesome, and I'm like, what are we doing? That never works or feels great. I also, just because I'm not American, I am a Canadian boy, as soon as like the cavalry showed up after big incidents, they're like waving an American flag. I'm like, okay, I get it. It's in the American Saga. I guess I know what we're in for. We're going to portray the white guy a certain way, and the indigenous people are going to behave a specific way. Now, I think how it handles the indigenous people of this movie is not bad. There's nuance and subtlety to every single character that it tries for. It could have definitely done it better. And that's another criticism I think people had of Killers of the Flower Moon. You're almost like, if we want to authentically tell that story, maybe we should have an indigenous person behind the camera to work on that. But that's not the story Costner wants to tell. He just has to have these people in here because they are the antagonists of the land to show you like the consequences of traveling. It's less like a classic like gunslinger western and more just like, well, America's got to be built, right? Let's go build America. But America's already built. Like this takes place in 1850 something. So it's like we already like have an established country. We're just headed west to like fill out the land more. I find that very weird because I guess you could have done this where it's like the start of America, but I guess it's more like when people start headed like towards California for like new land or whatever. It's so weird. And the movie just doesn't end. There's no ending. The movie literally has a sequence and then it stops and just gives you a teaser for what you could see in chapter 2 that comes out in a few months. And that was egregious. And I was literally in the cinema laughing, just thinking, I cannot believe this is how we're ending this. Not even like, to be continued or anything. Just like, and here's what's coming up. Don't worry. You didn't just waste your hard-earned money to watch nothing get resolved. Because nothing gets resolved, all we did was set up more characters for the next thing and the next thing. And it's like, I get it. You got a lot of people you like in this movie. I'm not against that. Your buddy Danny Houston shows up for a minute. That's cool. Sam Worthington does a very vague accent, and Michael Rooker does an even vaguer one. I know Michael Rooker is supposed to be Irish. Why don't I just have him talk normally? Why not just have Worthington do his natural accent, and you could have some whatever. I think the Rooker character was my favorite because it actually felt like an old man who's like tired. He's the only. There's a sequence where him and Danny Houston are talking about like, well, he's a young, lieutenant in our cavalry. He doesn't know the hardships of war coming his way. And I like that when it tries to lean into old men building a country they're never going to see like the success of. That's kind of fun. But then it just loses itself every time Costner has to like pretend to be like a pseudo father and partner to this thing. There's a very convoluted story about the kid that Abby Lee is protecting with Costner, about her mother and who she's escaping, and the family that she's from, that was from Montana, and there's like a Wyoming division, and they're coming out all over the place. It builds up so much and it goes nowhere. And again, this is a 3-hour film. You'd like to see it at least go somewhere and have something to say, but it's a lot of just ramping up to nothing. And that sucks. That is not how you should make a movie. When you're trying to sell audiences on your gigantic return to filmmaking, don't just get them geared up for another movie. That's not going to build trust again. It's going to make you look like you're trying to just like get more money out of them. And that sucks. And I know you put like $38 million into this thing. And I know one of your comments was like, oh, I don't need another vacation home. Good for you. That's true. You probably don't. But I'd at least like you to take the skills you clearly have as a filmmaker to make one earnest, real story. You clearly love American history. You love the idea of like settling in the West and building society that way. You like the idea of like hundreds of extras building a town and riding horses and just walking through the prairies and the landscapes. If I'm guessing where you filmed this in like Montana and Utah or whatever, why not just have something real then? It looks real. The script isn't. It definitely wants to have you have the feeling that this is like real history, but it's just so cinematic that you can never escape the feeling that this is movie stars doing a movie. And that kind of like contradicts everything we're saying here. It doesn't feel like cosplay, but there is a level where it's like, this is kind of just role playing for a bit, you know? Some of these like younger kids, they clearly have never worked a day in their life, and that's not a comment on their acting. That's just a comment on, yeah, that kid sounds like they're from 2023, you know? And that's not a problem. But when you're trying to make it about history, you lose a lot of the momentum. Saying all of this, saying how much I don't like this movie, I found it to just like drag on and be boring and eventually culminate into nothing. I really like the score. It's a very good score. The cinematography and sets are incredible. And I really respect Costner for doing it. Like, I think it's really cool. Like, he's played the modern Hollywood game. And that is, do the thing for them, and when you get the chance, do it for you and show them why you're good again. And that's pretty impressive. I respect him for doing that. It's just a shame that one of the last sequences we see of him in this movie is a woman 30 years younger than him, literally just like climbing on him while he's like, no, I don't want to have sex. She's like, shut up, I'll do all the work. It's kind of egregious in a very bad way. But again, this movie is not made for somebody of my generation who has no desire to visit the West or pretend he's a cowboy. This movie's made for your father and your grandfather. This is a movie for men over 50, and that's fine. They need some movies too, you know? Top Gun Maverick was made for them, but that also worked for younger people because the younger people were cool. I will definitely see the next one, but at the end of the day, this is so much ramping up to nothing with very little going forward substance-wise. It looks great. It is the perfect combination of Rebel Moon and Megalopolis. You have a huge idea in your head and you're going to put the money into it. But aside from good visuals, you are just setting up with too many characters and none of it goes nowhere. I completely left out specific storylines that have nothing to do with anything. But there's some good moments in there, some cool stuff to look at, and on occasion, fine dialogue. But not much of anything else. So, Horizon, an American Saga, Chapter 1. You can damn well be sure we'll be back for Chapter 2, and if we get Chapter 3 and if we get Chapter 4, I'll talk about them. I'm going to give Chapter 1, though, a 4 out of 10. Now, thank you all for watching this review. Be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. As always, you can check me out on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. And of course, I will catch you in the next one. Have fun. Stay safe. Good luck.